This is an example of what the office of the future is supposed to look like. They call this an executive workstation.
It is about minus 30 degrees out here today, and with this vicious wind chill factor, it is effectively minus 58.
We're in an alley about a block away from the Vancouver police station. This is the night that Gordy McCandless is going to get busted.
The problem is that having made it look so easy to come into Lebanon, how did they get out?
The sheer effectiveness of the rebel offensive has stunned the people, the government, and the army of El Salvador.
Distraught relatives continued to arrive in London from Canada today, but there was still no hope that they'd even be able to see the bodies of their loved ones.
And now we have a squabble over who's responsible for airport security. Sorting out all of these questions is going to take a long, long time.
And for 2 decades, Canadian governments have insisted there was no warning, no way to prevent the bombing of Air India Flight 182. But our investigation suggests that it's the official story that is wrong.
The scene was the security perimeter at the University of British Columbia, not far from where the leaders were pledging themselves to the economic and social well-being of their people.
You're affecting ignorance. That's not plausible, is it? You know.
No, that's actually quite possible.
You better watch it,
No.
because the truth comes out.
Don't tell me to watch it. That's your language. I don't answer to you. Last week's RCMP affidavit has caused a serious credibility problem for the Prime Minister.
There is another great story brewing, and this one is for real. The sun is going to turn into a red giant and we're all going to fry. You'll have to be patient, though, because that's not going to happen for 5 billion years.
And I'm Terry Milewski with $20 million in heroin.
Diane?
38 years with the CBC, more than 50 different countries, quite the variety of stories, but one man telling them all. And how happy I am to have a few minutes with him this morning. Terry Milewski in Ottawa. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Heather.
Thank you for being here today. We can't talk to you tomorrow because, true to form, you're working tomorrow, so we agreed to steal a few minutes today. You were listening to that as we were introducing you, Terry. I don't even know where to start, so why don't we start with that represents the body of work. What's it like to hear all of those stories and hear those 38 years all looking back over them?
It's a bit dizzying, really, because people have pulled out clips from places I'd forgotten I'd ever been. It was probably time to retire, because I filed from about 52 countries, that's the ones I remember, while working for the CBC. And it's been a long run. It's more than 40 years since I did my first freelance gig with the CBC. That was on a little radio show called As It Happens, which the pay was pitiful, and they clearly had no future. I mean, phoning people up and chatting on the phone. You know, what a useless idea that was. But it's been long enough, I figure, and I've sort of done travel, so I think it's time.
Have you done what you thought you'd do, what you wanted to do when you set off on this path of journalism?
Definitely not. I mean, there are a whole bunch of stories which are still with me. I mean, you know, look at the funeral of Shimon Peres today. It is turning into a global summit before our eyes, because the Middle East remains on the fault line of global history. Look at my long obsession with the Air India bombing of 1985. Do you think there's been any closure? Do you think there's been justice? I certainly don't feel that in any of these stories I've done my job. There's more to be done, but somebody else will have to do some of the digging, I think.
You mentioned two of the specific stories I want to talk about. Let's talk about Air India, number one. To me, it's your signature, the most impactful. Is that a fair assessment from you?
Yeah, it certainly had an impact on the process, and it certainly had an impact on me. I became friends with a lot of the victims' families, still am, and still share with them this sense that, you know, we never really got to the bottom of it, and that justice was not done. And there are others, though, which we haven't mentioned. I mean, I spent a lot of the early 80s in Central America, for example, another sort of epic contest like the Middle East, only this one between rich and poor, left and right, and you know, they're still struggling to get over that today. I still miss the people that I met. It used to be, of course, when we started out on all of these stories, that we spent a long time there. You know, you'd take up residence for a month or a couple of months, and you'd pretty much disappear until you reappeared with a story. No cell phone. The lines to Toronto would sometimes go strategically dead. You know, you'd just say, well, my battery died. Now, of course, the batteries last. But nowadays, you've got to do a rant for the next show up as soon as you get off the plane, before you even get to the war. And so the business has changed a great deal. But one thing that I think has not changed is that we never really get to the bottom of it. It's unfinished business, all of it.
As you say, case in point, what we're seeing in Israel right now. We have some images of you from this particular point in your career, because you were CBC's first Middle East correspondent. You set up the bureau there. There's some pictures of you in action. And as you said, the story is yet unwritten, as yet unfinished. The elusive piece, still elusive.
Yeah, and everyone's thinking about this, of course, now because of the death of Shimon Peres. But that story, it's amazing to me that we didn't have a Middle East bureau before. I set it up in 1986, and we were just spending so much money sending people in and out and in and out that it made more sense to have somebody there permanently. Honestly, looking back on those days, the story doesn't seem to have changed very much. It's still an intractable contest between two peoples over land. And I sometimes say that I fear that our children will make a good living covering the Middle East conflict.
Let me ask, not substance, style. The stash. I asked some people, what do you want me to ask Terry as I get a few minutes with him? And the stash that's become the signature almost all. I did see some pictures of you without one, but not very many. It's just been always there. Yeah,
it's been pretty much permanent. It was actually a symbol of childish rebellion, to tell you the truth. I went to India in 1967. I was just 18 years old and interviewed Indira Gandhi, by the way, which was quite an epic. And when I came back, I had a beard and mustache. And I didn't look like my passport photograph, and an officious Austrian border guard wouldn't let me back in to travel back across Europe to London because I didn't look like my passport. So he sent me back into, I guess, Bulgaria to shave. And I shaved off the beard, but I kept the mustache just to make a point, and it's been there ever since. And the delivery, that was the other thing people want to make sure I asked. The way you speak, but also these were sort of the Milewski bob and weave when you're doing your pieces to camera and the lean in. You know, you can't tear your eyes off you. You're such a commanding presence on the screen. Was that something that just happened, or was that something that you developed? Well, I always get overexcited about anything I talk about. That's the problem. Television likes cool, if you're in your job, you're not supposed to be tearing your hair out. But I always tear my hair out about every story I do, so I think that has something to do with this leaning in business that people talk about. Because I just can't wait to you got to hear this story, and it's kind of childish, but I can't get over it. It's your signature. We wouldn't have it any other way. When you say you just love every story, any thoughts on what you'll miss, Terry? Well, I won't miss the modern style of travel. The old day I would have missed. The travel of the kind that we used to do, where we'd, as I say, set up in a hotel, be there for a month, get to know some people, travel around the country, speak a bit of the language. Now you sort of fly in on the Prime Minister's junket and you do a rant, as I say, about something you haven't even seen yet because the news must be fed constantly. Then you go to the presidential palace, grip and grin, photo op with the president, back on the plane to the next country. I won't miss that because it's not particularly rewarding. And you're basically a prisoner of the Prime Minister who takes you and his staff. You can break out a little bit here and there, but it's hard. I won't miss that, that's for sure. But I will miss being in the flow of the news and the excitement of something happening. They always drop bad news, 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Mm-hmm. And, the phone rings. They say, my God, we got to do, and you've got to write fast, you got to think fast, and you've got to write history on the run. And get it right, because nowadays something that I might not miss is that everybody, this whole army of Twitterers who are checking you. It used to be that you do a little story on private radio where I got my start out in BC, and nobody was recording it. Nobody knew what you said. Nobody could remember it, and that way you were safe because your blunders would vanish into the memory hole. Now your blunders live on. Well, you are not going
totally out of the picture, going to be online, going to be coming in to work and fill in, and that is wonderful news, because when I ask you what you will miss, so many will miss you on a daily basis. So thank you for the time today. We could fill the whole hour. Congrats on work that has had meaning and a career that has mattered in this country. Would you do me a favor, Terry? I want to play a bunch of sign-offs. Would you sign off one more time live for me, and then we'll play some.
Terry Milewski, well, do you want me to say, well, Peter? No, I'll skip that. Terry Milewski, CBC News, Ottawa.
Terry Milewski, CBC News, Calgary.
It's near Ba'abda in the hills above Beirut.
Cairo.
Moscow. Cork, Ireland.
Santa Tecla, El Salvador.
At NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Jerusalem.
Washington.
Vancouver. Terry Milewski, CBC News, Ottawa.